Okay, so time management is probably undoubtedly the least sexy possible topic that we could be talking about in a chess video. But nonetheless, we are going to be talking about it because it is one of these things which, if you are constantly getting into time trouble, your time management is just not on point, even if you actually are improving your overall chess ability, is going to be holding just your overall improvement back, and you aren't going to be able to see the results that you really want to. And while there are players out there like Alexander Grishuk, for example, who seem to thrive under time trouble, realize that you're probably not Alexander Grishuk, right? This guy, first of all, probably has a phenomenal intuition that you probably do not have. You're just going to be making much better decisions on average if you have more time on the clock. If you're always getting super low on time in positions where you have to make important decisions, that is going to greatly hinder just your rate in progress and whatnot as a player. And also, I want you guys to understand that even though the stuff we're going to be talking about today should help in terms of your time management, there are still going to be points in games where you might not be able to avoid time trouble. It's just to some extent an inevitable part of the condition of playing chess. However, getting into the actionable stuff now, I want you guys to really internalize these 4 types of decisions. I got these from a book called, well, this is at least what formalized it for me. So I have this book, it's called Thinking Inside the Box. It's by Grandmaster Jakob Aagaard, and he basically talks about how in this book, he's came up with sort of, and he's a world-class trainer if you don't know, these 4 types of decisions that we generally need to make during a chess game. So one is automatic. This is like, the opening theory, they make a capture and you make a recapture. Pretty automatic. There's nothing else you can do. You just know that you need to make that move. Second is simple. This is like a sort of maybe more positional decision. There's not many tactics going on. Strategic is often lumped together with simple, but it's more like maybe it's not such of a tactical nature, the sort of move you're making or decision you need to make, but the move you're going to make is going to have a profound long-term impact on the position. And so the big difference between this and this is going to be that usually you're going to need to spend a bit more time on these sorts of decisions than these ones. And last of all, critical decisions, these are the ones you're probably going to need to spend the most time on. And usually there's like 1, 2, maybe multiple critical moments during a game. Sometimes there's none, but that's kind of rare. But in general, you want to make sure that you're not burning all your time on like these 3 decisions, right? And then not having enough time for the critical decisions. But we're going to go a bit more just into detail now, and we're going to show some concrete examples soon of sort of what these might look like in practice. But okay, automatic decision, again, I don't think this really needs much explanation, but we will show a concrete example. Simple decision, very often, like the first best move and the 5th best move, the difference between them actually aren't going to be that substantial. There's probably many different playable moves you can make, just due to the maybe not so tactical nature of the position. And you should generally be trying to use these 3 questions. What is my opponent's worst placed piece? What are my opponent's weaknesses? What is my opponent's idea? I've talked about this in another video I made. I'll put it up in the card somewhere, but you should be spending a bit more time than on, say, automatic decisions. But calculating too deeply in these positions and trying to like foresee all the different possibilities is often a waste of time, because often in these sorts of positions, your opponent also has a lot of different things they can do. That trying to anticipate every single possibility and like calculating all these lines is just often a waste of time. And in a classical game, this would maybe be spending more than like, let's say, 5 to 6 minutes. That's of course like a generalization, but that's a general guideline. You wouldn't want to be spending more time than that on a simple decision. Critical decision, these are where like the difference between the first best move and the second best move is like actually quite substantial and would have quite a significant impact on the evaluation of the position. These sorts of moments typically require doing a fair bit of calculation, and again, you want to make sure that you have enough time saved up. Of course, there will sometimes be moments that are critical and both of you guys are in time trouble, whatever. Like, to some extent, it's out of your control. But if you're like at move 20 and there's a critical moment and you have like, it's like a 90-minute classical game and you have like 5 minutes, like, okay, that's poor time management. And that's definitely your fault for getting to that point where you have this important decision to make, but you don't have enough time to make, or figure out rather, what the best move is. Because again, you're like spending maybe too much time on like simple decisions earlier on. And finally, strategic decisions. Again, sort of I explained this part a bit earlier on, but unlike critical decisions, usually these can't be like fully calculated out. Often you can do a little bit of calculation, but often there's some level of like intuition involved as well, where you sort of need to be able to feel out like, okay, is this like change I'm making to the pawn structure, is this going to be good long term, is this going to be bad long term? Some calculation will help, but you probably won't be able to fully rely on that to make the best decision there. And yeah, in general, like you want to be spending a bit more time on these than maybe like your simple decisions, but probably less so than like a full-on critical decision. Again, this is all just like a generalization. In practice, things are always a bit more messy than theory. So just to illustrate some like examples, automatic decision here would be not e takes d5, hopefully. I hope you're not automatically playing the exchange French unless that's actually your repertoire, but like say if you're black, for example, then you would automatically be playing e takes d5, and because it's like, what else do you do, right? Like, okay, queen takes is kind of crap, I hope you understand that, and like bishop d3, like let's say we have the following moves. Let's say if black plays like bishop f5 here, for example, and white takes it, again, that bishop takes f5 should not be an automatic move for white necessarily. Probably best is keeping the tension with something like rook e1, but or maybe even avoiding the trade perhaps, because this is sort of our good bishop. But like for black at the very least, it would sort of be automatic to take. I think that's a fair assessment, right? You wouldn't need to be thinking that much about it. A simple decision, on the other hand, could be something like in this position where there's not that much contact between the pieces. Okay, maybe there's this pawn contact, but it's white to move, and like, okay, you could maybe think about taking, but generally in the stone wall, it's well understood that you don't really want to kind of release the tension like this unless sort of you can force c takes d5. Usually if they can play e takes d5 without any clear like tactical drawback, that's sort of in black's favor. Here white does have a passed e pawn, but still like the knight can blockade it or something like that, or the bishop can just sit there, and it's not actually clear that this really helps white. So probably you just want to play some slow improving move. You could ask the 3 questions. What is my opponent's worst placed piece? Sorry, what is my worst placed piece rather? What are my opponent's weaknesses and what are my opponent's ideas? In this game, which was mine if I didn't say already, I ended up playing knight to c2, basically identifying that this knight was pretty awfully placed. Maybe this is a weakness I can target by bringing my knight to the square. And okay, I haven't got like everything completely planned out yet, but like, why would I? There's so many different things. Well, okay, there's not that many different things black can do. They're probably going to develop the bishop, but it's like trying to anticipate like all the possible things that could happen from here, just a waste of time. I just need to improve like my position just a little bit, and then to some extent take things as they come. But to highlight now a mix of strategic decision making and critical decision making, I want to show this game that I played against an international master last year here in Sydney, where I had the black pieces in this sort of complicated looking field door opening. But I guess to first of all understand like what type of decision we're even making here, like you first have to sort of notice the nature of the position is that white has like quite an annoying space advantage. If black sort of plays slow moves, we improve our pieces and whatnot. Like, it's just not going to work. Like, if we just play too slowly, they're going to bring all the pieces in. And eventually, once all their pieces just fully improve to the maximum, it's going to be even harder to really get in any sort of pawn break like d5, c5, any sort of ambitions we may have, which should hopefully highlight the urgency that we might have in this position to really, if we're going to do something, like try to do it as soon as possible before white consolidates all their forces and is very well coordinated. And so for that reason, I was looking at stuff like d5, c5, maybe even d5 very quickly. I recognized, okay, I'm not so concerned about them taking and potentially trying to win a pawn. I felt that like things would open up sort of in my favor. The king side could potentially be quite weak, but I was however concerned about like e5, and then it's like, okay, does my knight really go to like h7, right? Like I don't know, I really want to play that. So then I started looking instead at maybe like c5, and I was like, ooh, that looks interesting. Like maybe I can bring my bishop to c6, sort of attack this pawn maybe. And okay, it does create some sort of static weaknesses on d5. Maybe it's a backward d6 pawn as well that I'm getting. But I was okay sort of making these sort of sacrifices to sort of get this immediate dynamic counterplay. Because again, otherwise I sort of felt that like I was just going to get squashed if I didn't, again, take some sort of more immediate action. However, I didn't like this because after knight f5, I'm like, this knight looks really annoying, and if I take it, then they open up their bishop, and well, my knight's also under attack, so they're probably just gonna like pick up a pawn maybe, or maybe even like say play g5. That could be even stronger, and then sort of roll me on the king side. Because yeah, if they take on b7, maybe like rook b8 and potentially like not even takes, but perhaps d5 immediately, and you could sort of get some counterplay perhaps. Oh, I forgot I'm hanging the pawn, so maybe not that, maybe just take. But yeah, regardless, I didn't really trust that allowing this was a good idea. So basically, again, like I have to make some sort of decision in this position, which will have long-term implications. If you play a move like c5, that's very committal. You're gonna need to think that through a bit more than just playing something like queen c7 and like rook d8. But obviously, the consequence of making these sort of moves is that now you're playing too slowly and you're going to have to face more difficult decisions in the long run. Like this is something that sometimes people do. They like see a decision that they kind of are faced with and they're confused about like what to do on one move, and they just delay that and keep postponing it moves ahead, and they never end up making a decision to the point that then their position gets so bad they can no longer make that decision and they're basically paralyzed. You don't want to be in that situation. I recognize that I end up playing knight to h4, which looks a bit wacky. It looks like, okay, well, first of all, I'm attacking the bishop, which is an important defender of their king. He moves the bishop backwards. But the point was now that if I play c5, I recognize that after knight to f5, I can take it, and I can go bishop c6, and I can neutralize the bishop. So maybe he'd play g takes f5 instead if he got to this, but still I can go like bishop c6, maybe target the pawn. So what ended up happening was, well, again, like if he goes knight db5, I was probably going to go like bishop c6, but my opponent ended up going for knight de2 with the idea to go knight g3 against bishop c6 and sort of try to consolidate in that manner. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I could go for bishop c6, but actually, maybe this is quite a critical moment, because again, maybe if I do that, I'll allow him to consolidate, and I could just be getting squeezed after this with like queen d3, rook a d1. So I really spent quite a few minutes here, like 7 or 8 I think, really trying to calculate this d5 break, highlighting the fact right now that on e2, the bishop is not being very well protected, so he can't just simply take that with a pawn. If he goes e5, another idea is that compared to this position, right, we saw earlier on the first move that we at least started looking from, now in this position, like, well, d5, e5 was an issue, but now if d5, e5, maybe I get d4 as an intermediate move, and there's some drama going on here where things might not be so simple for white. So what ended up happening after the move d5, which I played after some thought, was knight takes d5, and then I was like, okay, now I take on e4. That was another important idea. He plays queen to d3, and there's probably quite a few different things you can do. I wouldn't quite call this like a critical moment, and actually it doesn't really neatly fit into any of the decisions. It's not like automatic, like we just move our knight back. Well, in fact, you have to be careful. Well, you don't really hang this here because the bishop's also hanging at the end, so like this is definitely possible. Knight to f6. And I don't know, I also wouldn't call this a simple decision because like there's obviously a lot of pieces kind of like hanging and stuff. There's a lot of confrontation between the pieces. I wouldn't call this like a strategic decision because like it is of more tactical sort of nature, but at the same time, is it also like a critical moment? Well, because if we go by the strict definition, right, of what a critical moment is, where like the difference between the first and second best move is like quite substantial, well, this doesn't really fit that because there's actually multiple different moves black can play. But regardless of that, because of the somewhat tactical nature of the position, you obviously need to be spending some time here to at least figure out something you're kind of satisfied with. I don't think I spent that much time on this move. I played bishop c6 in the end, basically with the idea that if he takes it, I'm just going to be ballsy and take it, and then I'm going to be winning back the material with interest probably, because like maybe here, well, if you go there, then like queen h4 check you're running into. With this one, maybe I still go queen h4. At the very least I can, well, actually I'm not sure because I also hang the bishop if I do that, but at the very least I can win back the material, and I will be doing at least fine. I have the bishop here as well, which will be beneficial if we ever go into an endgame. But now after bishop c6, my opponent did not take it, he went c4, and now this is definitely more of like a, and you don't always know during a game like when it is a critical moment. That's like another thing, right? But you just sort of have to use your brain. Like, is this a very concrete moment where like if I do something good or bad that could significantly change the evaluation? Like, that's roughly what I would say is like a critical moment, and a good sign you need to be hunkering down and spending a bit of time like just sort of thinking, right? But in this position again, I was like, okay, well, I'm in a very prime situation right now where like I have these active looking knights, my rook is well placed, my queen could potentially be jumping into the action somewhere, my bishop is kind of blocked in this diagonal, but maybe there's some potential there, right? And to me, it would just be such a shame if I like got to this moment and then I was like, oh, well, I guess I'll just retreat, like, because then I just take like away any dynamic attacking possibilities, and now I give my opponent a chance to consolidate, and probably now they're just better. They can play bishop f2, kick my knight back, and that forces me to get further passive. And I was like, okay, no, let me try and find a way to keep all my pieces where they are and sort of make use of their position right now to really get some very active play. So I was looking into bishop takes d5, and after c takes d5, this moves c4. And to be honest, actually, even though this was maybe somewhat of a critical moment, you could say, like sort of going for this sort of pawn sacrifice and really playing for the initiative, opening my pieces up, I didn't actually spend that much time on this. I played this like pretty quickly, actually. Like I exchanged on d5 without much hesitation and played c4 like after about a minute of thinking. And these all did turn out to be the best moves, after which black actually has like quite a big advantage if we follow up correctly. One of the big points, right, is that like if they don't take the pawn, they go like queen d4, then bishop c5 is going to be winning material. If they go somewhere like backwards, and like maybe I have like, I can maybe think about taking, but also like knight g5 as well. There's a lot of dangerous threats, and if they take it, then rook takes e3, and like there's just so many like possibilities, right, with all of our active pieces. This looks pretty suicidal for white. But I think at this point, like I mentioned how I made this sort of move more quickly, definitely like a few years back I wouldn't have been able to make this decision with as much speed, because I had a lot more hesitation when it came to sacrificing material, especially when there's no like maybe immediate tactical payoff. This was more of like an intuitive sacrifice in some sense. Like I didn't necessarily see this like seeing like, okay, I'm gonna like win back material like this way, I'm gonna win material if I play c4. I'm like, okay, my pieces are gonna be very active. I think I see some tactical opportunities, but it was largely the feeling of like, okay, I'm opening lines for my pieces. If they take, I get like rook c8. If they take also, their bishop is quite loose. That opens up knight g5 ideas. And I at least saw more than like one good reason as to why the c4 move would be quite promising. But okay, what ended up following up from here was quite tragic. So after queen takes c4, I actually end up rejecting knight g5 for what might to some look like a rather strange reason, which is that I was like, okay, if he takes this and this, I mean, this is like, okay, I'm temporarily down a pawn, but like this cannot just be good for him with how weak his king side is. So I was mainly actually looking at like knight g3 and him sacrificing the exchange, and I actually wasn't super sure how to evaluate this with this like, with like the bishop here, this pawn which is passed and protected, my knight which sort of felt a bit offside, but it turns out actually that black is sort of just like much better here, and especially after sacrificing the exchange back and then going like rook c8, bishop c5, this really kills a lot of white's potential in the position, and black is completely winning. So I ended up settling for rook c8, attacking the queen, knight c5, and then we actually repeated moves for a bit, and it's difficult for him, right? Because his queen always has to babysit the bishop, which was loose, which was again another reason why I thought c4 would be quite strong. And then eventually, like I think he offered a draw in this position, and I could have taken it. He was like the higher rated player, of course, but at this point, I made a shocking blunder, which was based upon a miscalculation, probably because this was the third classical game I was playing that day of 90+30 chess. And for you guys who don't play tournaments, well, in Europe, they usually only play like one game a day a lot of the times. The guys over there can't even handle 2 games a day. Apologies from Europe, but it's true. Here in Australia, we play 3 of those a day sometimes. And at this point, I was pretty bloody exhausted, and I ended up calculating this line where after bishop c5, knight d4, I ended up thinking I had some like rook c4 move, but of course that's just not legal here, so I was really beating myself up here. And I think even after somehow maybe my position, no, okay, this was pretty bad at this point. I think, no, it was in this position, it's not so bad if I play knight b4 apparently, but I mean that wasn't the reason why I played rook takes e3, right? I was like, okay, I have bishop c5, knight d4, rook c4, queen b6, and I'm winning back material or something. Probably that wasn't even right, to be honest, but it just added insult to injury that like I made such a shocking miscalculation, probably because I was just so tired at that point. But given that I felt like I was sort of outplaying him from like this point on, right, where I was like playing very dynamically, I sort of correctly identified again this was like a moment that I had to sort of hunker down a little bit, figure out sort of the long-term implications of going for this, and sort of say like, okay, again, I didn't figure everything out, right? Like I was like, okay, I'm taking a bit of a risk here, but I think I'd rather take that risk than just sort of almost guaranteed get squashed. And especially when he went knight d2, sort of leaving this bishop a little bit loose, I'm like, okay, now we're talking with d5 again. I had to calculate a little bit. Was this exactly a critical moment? Maybe not, because the difference between like bishop c6 and d5 was the best move, but it was only like, for context, the evaluation if white plays best is like plus 0.3, whereas bishop c6 is like plus 0.6. But my only problem is that after like this, it's just very difficult to actually give a clear plan for black, right? Like white has everything under control. This break's never gonna work out too well. Maybe we have to go like a6, b5, b4, something like that. But okay, yeah, it's a bit of a messy video, this one. It's largely because something like time management, it's not super black and white, right? Like there's no simple formula on like, okay, in this position you spend this much time, in this one. Like you have to use your own judgment. I can help a little bit, but there's no like Russian secrets out there to time management that will make you play perfectly and never get into time trouble, right? Like that doesn't exist. But if you do take into consideration some of the examples and general guidelines that I put out today of the 4 types of decisions, I think that can greatly sort of help in identifying like, okay, you know, like for example, like in this position that I showed in the first one, if you're spending like 15 minutes here trying to figure out something to do, like that would probably be wrong, right? And that's like probably in this sort of position. I know we didn't spend a lot of time on this, but a lot of people, this is sort of where they're burning too much time and why they get into time trouble. And so if you haven't already watched my video actually on the 3 questions that took me from 2045 to 2132, I'm going to put that up somewhere here. You can check that out after this video finishes. But if you want more help with your game with one-on-one coaching, I do offer that. There's a form in the description below. If you're between roughly like 1500 to 2000, that's a range of players that I mostly help. So if you're within that range and you want more help, check that out. But for the rest of you, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed this content. But anyways, go check out this video wherever it is. Hope you guys have a good one.